Beneath your feet right now, hidden under layers of modern pavement and concrete, lie the silent remains of an engineering revolution, one that kept entire civilizations alive against impossible odds. Picture the narrow, winding streets of a medieval city, bustling with merchants and blacksmiths, children playing near open gutters, soldiers patrolling towering walls. But what truly kept these cities standing wasn't just what you could see above ground, it was the secret world beneath the cobblestones. A labyrinth of tunnels carried fresh water to homes, diverted filth from crowded streets, and even smuggled spies beneath enemy gates during sieges. These weren't just crude ditches, they were feats of engineering so advanced, some of them are still in use today. Now imagine the stakes. A single contaminated well could doom thousands to disease. A blocked sewer might choke a city in filth before invaders even reach the gates. Without these hidden systems, entire populations would have collapsed under plagues, famines, and wars. Yet medieval engineers armed with little more than picks, shovels, and sheer ingenuity built networks so resilient they outlasted empires. From the geothermal heated baths of France to the vast underground granaries of Turkey, they turned the earth itself into a shield against disaster. And here's the fascinating part. If you live in a city today, you're still benefiting from their breakthroughs. Those subway tunnels, the water pipes beneath your apartment. They owe their existence to lessons learned 800 years ago. This is the untold story of how darkness became salvation, how medieval cities thrived not in spite of their limits, but because they mastered the art of survival underground. We'll journey through flooded crypts, climb down into plague pits, and decode secret symbols carved into tunnel walls by long-forgotten builders. Along the way, you'll discover how a drainage ditch in London saved countless lives, why some tunnels were built just wide enough for a single spy to slip through unseen, and how hidden reservoirs secretly fed entire neighborhoods during sieges. By the end, you'll never look at a city street the same way again because now you'll know what lies beneath. Walk through the gates of any thriving medieval city, and you'd immediately sense the careful planning behind its chaotic charm. These weren't haphazard settlements, they were pulsating engines of commerce, faith, and power, each street and square deliberately designed to serve a purpose. Take Bruges, for example, where canals doubled as trade routes and defensive moats, or Constantinople, whose towering walls and strategic harbors made it the envy of the world. As populations swelled, sometimes tripling in size within a single generation, cities faced a crisis: how to keep thousands fed, safe, and healthy within cramped stone walls. The answer: they built downward. Overcrowding turned every challenge into a life or death equation. A single blocked street could trap residents during a fire, and a contaminated well could spark an epidemic. In London, records show that by the 13th century, the city's population had grown so dense that waste often overflowed into streets, creating a breeding ground for disease. Meanwhile, threats like the Mongol invasions or the 100 Years' War forced cities to think creatively about defense. Underground tunnels became the unsung heroes, hidden arteries that carried water away from homes during floods, secret passages for soldiers to ambush invaders, or storage vaults to hoard grain during sieges. But perhaps the most fascinating twist was how these cities adapted to their unique environments. In the arid Middle East, engineers dug qanats, gently sloping tunnels that tapped into distant aquifers, delivering water without a single drop lost to evaporation. In Venice, builders drove thousands of wooden piles into muddy islands to stabilize foundations, creating a subterranean forest that still supports the city today. Even the layout of streets often followed ancient Roman grids or spiraled outward from cathedrals, funneling pilgrims and prophets straight into the heart of power. What united these cities wasn't just their ingenuity, it was their desperation. Survival demanded innovation, and the constraints of space forced engineers to work miracles beneath the earth. Tomorrow's merchants might walk over a newly dug sewer without a second thought, never realizing it was the very reason their market could thrive. The lesson: when you can't build outward, you dig deeper, and in that darkness medieval cities found their light. Water was the lifeblood of every medieval city, and securing it required more than just digging a well. It demanded engineering brilliance. Picture this: in the scorching heat of the Middle East, Persian engineers designed qanats, underground channels that sloped just enough to let gravity pull water from distant mountains straight into city squares. These weren't simple ditches, they were precision-carved tunnels, sometimes stretching over 30 miles, with vertical shafts for maintenance and airflow. A single qanat could supply enough water to irrigate entire fields and fill public baths, turning deserts into oases. Meanwhile, in Europe, cities like London faced a different challenge. With the Thames too polluted for drinking, they built the Great Conduit, a massive lead pipe system that fed fresh spring water into a central reservoir at Cheapside. From there, water carriers filled their barrels daily, delivering clean water door to door for a fee. But clean water was only half the battle. Distribution was key. In Constantinople, the Romans had left behind a legacy of aqueducts so advanced that medieval engineers kept them running for centuries. The Valens aqueduct, for example, carried water over hills and valleys into massive underground cisterns like the Basilica cistern, where columns supported ceilings high enough to row a boat through. These reservoirs weren't just storage, they were pressure regulators, ensuring steady flow even during droughts. And in places like Siena, Italy, the Bettini system used a network of brick-lined tunnels to channel water to public fountains, each one a masterpiece of civic pride adorned with sculptures and inscriptions. What's astonishing is how these systems adapted to local needs. In arid regions, water was hoarded like gold, with strict laws punishing anyone who wasted it. In Venice, where freshwater was scarce, rainwater collected from rooftops funneled into private cisterns beneath palazzos, filtered through layers of sand to keep it pure. And in mountainous towns like Toledo, Spain, Moorish engineers built Noria's giant water wheels powered by the current of the Tagus River to lift water high above the cliffs where it could flow down into homes and gardens. Yet for all their ingenuity, these systems had a dark side. When sieges came, attackers knew cutting off water meant certain victory. During the Crusades, armies poisoned wells or diverted aqueducts to starve cities into surrender. That's why some towns like Carcassonne built secret wells inside their walls, hidden beneath false floors in cellars or churches. Others, like the hilltop city of Rhodes, dug deep into bedrock to reach underground springs, ensuring they'd never run dry. The true marvel: many of these medieval systems are still in use today. Walk through Istanbul, and you might drink from a fountain fed by the same pipes that quenched the thirst of Byzantine emperors. Or visit the Spanish city of Segovia, where the Roman aqueduct, maintained and expanded in the Middle Ages, still stands as a towering monument to human ingenuity. These weren't just feats of engineering, they were acts of survival, proof that in a world where water meant power, the cleverest cities were the ones that mastered the flow. Imagine the stench of a medieval city without sewers, piles of waste rotting in streets, rivers thick with filth, and the constant threat of disease looming over every household. This was the reality many cities faced until engineers devised an underground solution. Beneath the bustling markets and homes hidden from view, ran networks of drainage channels that saved countless lives. Take Paris, where 12th-century monks at the Abbey of St. Victor began covering open gutters with stone arches, creating some of Europe's first enclosed sewers. These tunnels carried waste straight to the Seine, transforming streets from disease-ridden swamps into livable spaces. But Paris wasn't alone. In Rome, the ancient Cloaca Maxima, originally built by the Etruscans around 600 BCE, was still functioning 1,000 years later, proof of its revolutionary design. This massive stone channel, wide enough for a boat to row through, drained marshes and stormwater while keeping the city's heart dry. What made these systems remarkable wasn't just their scale, it was their adaptability. In coastal cities like Dubrovnik, engineers built sloped drains that used tidal flows to flush waste out to sea twice a day. Meanwhile, in hilly towns like Assisi, Italy, stepped channels prevented erosion by slowing water's descent during heavy rains. Some designs were downright ingenious. York's medieval sewer system included wooden filters to trap solid waste before it could clog tunnels, while London's Fleet Ditch used natural gradients to keep water moving even during dry spells. And when disasters struck, like the Great Fire of London in 1666, it was these hidden channels that helped firefighters contain the blaze by feeding water to strategic points. But maintaining these systems was a grueling task. In Nuremberg, teams of gong farmers descended into tunnels at night to shovel out accumulated waste, hauling it beyond city walls for disposal. Their work was dangerous. Collapse risks, toxic gases, and even rats the size of small dogs lurked in the darkness. Yet without them, cities would have choked on their own filth. The stakes couldn't be higher when sewer maintenance failed, as it did in Siena during a 14th-century plague outbreak. The results were catastrophic. The true legacy of these medieval sewers, many never stopped working. Walk through Edinburgh's Old Town today, and you're treading above vaulted tunnels from the 1500s that still handle runoff. Or visit Lisbon, where the Galerias Romanas, originally built by the Romans and expanded in the Middle Ages, continue to drain heavy rains. These weren't just feats of engineering, they were acts of collective survival, proving that sometimes the greatest innovations lie beneath our feet and in the willingness to face the mess head-on. Beneath the cobbled streets and towering walls of medieval cities lay a hidden web of tunnels, some wide enough for armies, others so narrow you'd have to crawl. These weren't just shortcuts or storage spaces, they were lifelines engineered to outwit invaders and ensure survival during the deadliest sieges. Take Nottingham's legendary caves, carved into sandstone cliffs beneath the castle. During attacks, entire families could vanish into these winding passages, emerging miles away in Sherwood Forest. But Nottingham was far from alone. In Naples, a labyrinth of tunnels dating back to Greek and Roman times became a medieval escape route, with hidden exits leading to the coastline or nearby villages. Some passages even doubled as smuggling corridors, where merchants moved goods under the noses of tax collectors or enemy blockades. Espionage thrived in these shadowy networks. Beneath the city of York, archaeologists discovered tunnels connecting key buildings perfect for spies to eavesdrop or slip messages undetected. In Prague, rumors persist of secret passages used by alchemists and political dissidents to evade persecution. The most ingenious tunnels served multiple purposes. Beneath the fortress of Carcassonne in France, defenders dug counter-siege mines, narrow shafts designed to intercept enemy diggers. When attackers tunneled to undermine the walls, defenders would break through sideways, leading to brutal underground battles in pitch darkness. Not all tunnels were for humans. In Malta, the Knights Hospitaller built grain chutes that allowed them to resupply their fortresses even while surrounded. Grain could be poured from cliffside silos directly into underground storerooms, bypassing enemy lines entirely. Meanwhile, in Scotland, the winds and closes of Edinburgh hid subterranean routes used by rebels during wars of independence, some so well concealed they've only been rediscovered in the last decade. The true genius of these tunnels lay in their secrecy. Entrances were often hidden behind false walls, under church altars, or even disguised as wells. In Mont Saint Michel, the abbey's labyrinthine staircases included trapdoors leading to escape routes known only to monks. And when danger passed, many tunnels were deliberately collapsed or filled in, leaving invaders to wonder how entire garrisons had seemingly vanished overnight. These weren't just holes in the ground, they were masterclasses in psychological warfare, proving that sometimes the best defense was disappearing entirely. When a city's gate slammed shut against an invading army, the clock started ticking not just for defenders on the walls, but for every hungry mouth inside. Medieval sieges could drag on for months, even years, and starvation was often a deadlier enemy than swords. That's why the smartest cities didn't just stockpile food, they buried it. Beneath homes, churches, and town squares lay vast underground granaries, some capable of holding enough grain to feed thousands for an entire winter. Take Derinkuyu in Cappadocia, where 18 levels of tunnels honeycombed the soft volcanic rock. Entire chambers were dedicated to storing wheat, barley, and lentils, kept fresh by the earth's natural coolness and humidity. But this wasn't just a Turkish phenomenon. In the Scottish stronghold of Edinburgh, vaults beneath the Royal Mile held salted herring and oats, while beneath the streets of Siena, brick-lined pits preserved olive oil and wine in perfect darkness. The engineering behind these storage systems was remarkably sophisticated. In drier climates like the Middle East, granaries were often dug deep below the water table, where the moisture in the air kept grains from becoming too brittle. In colder regions like Poland, underground ice chambers were lined with straw insulation to keep meat frozen year-round. Some cities even built false floors above their granaries, hiding precious food stocks from invaders who might breach the walls. The Italian city of Orvieto took this a step further. Its labyrinth of tunnels included vertical grain silos with narrow openings at street level, allowing citizens to pour harvests directly into storage without enemy forces ever spotting the activity. But storing food was only half the battle. Preventing rot and pests required ingenious solutions. In the underground warehouses of Constantinople, workers burned sulfur to fumigate grain against weevils, while in Moorish Spain, clay amphorae sealed with beeswax kept olive oil from spoiling for decades. Some communities, like the cliffside city of Matera in Italy, carved ventilation shafts into their underground granaries, creating natural airflow that prevented mold. And when the worst happened, like during the Great Famine of 1315, these hidden reserves often meant the difference between survival and collapse. What's astonishing is how many of these ancient storage techniques still work today. Modern studies have shown that grain stored in traditional underground pits in places like Ethiopia remains edible for up to 50 years, far longer than anything kept in modern silos. The lesson was clear: when you couldn't control the world above ground, you mastered the one below. And as winters grew harsher or sieges dragged on, those who dug deepest often lasted longest. The true brilliance of these systems lay in their adaptability. In coastal cities like Dubrovnik, where salt was plentiful, underground chambers became curing rooms for fish and pork, creating stockpiles of protein that could last for years. In wine-growing regions like Burgundy, chalk tunnels maintained perfect temperatures for aging barrels, a practice some vineyards still use. Even the humble potato, introduced to Europe late in the medieval period, found its way into subterranean storage. In Ireland, clamps-mounded pits lined with straw and earth kept potatoes edible through freezing winters. proving that old solutions could adapt to new foods. Perhaps no story better illustrates the power of these hidden larders than the siege of Montségur in 1244. For nearly a year, Cathar rebels held out against a crusading army, thanks to a network of caves stocked with enough dried beans, smoked meat, and hardened cheese to feed hundreds. When they finally surrendered, the invaders found empty granaries, proof that the defenders had rationed their underground hoard down to the last crumb. It was a silent testament to a simple truth. In medieval warfare, the real battle wasn't always fought with swords, but with foresight, and the cities that dug deepest often stood the longest. Long before the term renewable energy entered our vocabulary, medieval engineers were already harnessing the Earth's natural heat in ways that would impress modern environmentalists. Picture a frosty morning in 14th century shows Aigues, France, where steam rises from grates in the cobblestone streets, not from fires but from hot springs deep below. The townspeople had crafted a network of stone pipes that channeled scalding water at nearly 180 degrees Fahrenheit directly into homes and public baths. This wasn't just a luxury, it was survival engineering. The system, known as the calidarium, used gravity to circulate water through hollow walls and under floors, creating the world's earliest known district heating system. And it wasn't unique. Across Europe, from Iceland's thermally heated greenhouses to the thermal baths of Budapest, communities built atop geological hotspots turned their luck into innovation. What's remarkable is how these systems mirrored modern geothermal principles. In Iceland's Reykholt, the scholar and chieftain Snorri Sturluson used a hot spring to feed a bathing pool inside his home around 1220. The water's path was carefully engineered, first flowing through a stone duct to cool slightly, then diverted to warm living spaces before finally exiting to defrost stables. This cascade of heat reuse would make any contemporary engineer nod in approval. Even more impressive, some of these medieval systems are still operational. The warm floors of Turkey's ancient city of Hierapolis, fed by calcite-rich springs, inspired Roman baths and later medieval adaptations where the same thermal waters still flow today. But geothermal heating wasn't just about comfort, it was an economic powerhouse. In the Alsace region, monasteries used warm groundwater to extend growing seasons, cultivating herbs and vegetables in winter when others starved. The monks of Maulbronn Abbey in Germany even piped geothermal heat into their scriptorium, ensuring ink wouldn't freeze during long hours of manuscript copying. This intersection of ecology and economy reveals a medieval understanding of sustainability we often overlook. The real genius lay in adaptation. Where high-temperature springs weren't available, engineers improvised. In northern England, Cistercian monks built hypocaust systems borrowing Roman technology, where underground wood fires heated stones, and the residual warmth was channeled through ducts beneath monastery dormitories. In Russia's frigid north, homes were partially buried, using the earth's insulating properties to retain heat. These solutions shared a common thread, working with the environment rather than against it. Yet these systems had vulnerabilities. During the Little Ice Age, when temperatures plummeted in the 1400s, some geothermal networks froze or clogged with mineral deposits. Maintenance was grueling. Workers known as heat miners would descend into tunnels to chip away calcium buildup, often in suffocating heat. And when wars erupted, invaders targeted these thermal networks first. The destruction of Budapest's bath complexes during the Ottoman sieges showed how easily a city's warmth could be stolen. What can we learn from these medieval marvels? Modern geothermal plants in Iceland now power entire cities using the same principles, just with turbines instead of stone ducts. the lesson is clear: sustainability isn't a new idea. It's a rediscovery, and as we face today's energy challenges, perhaps the answers lie not in futuristic tech, but in the quiet ingenuity beneath our feet. Fire could reduce a thriving medieval city to ashes in hours, with buildings packed shoulder to shoulder and roofs often thatched with dry straw. A single spark from a blacksmith's forge or overturned lantern could spell disaster. That's why underground water networks became a city's silent guardians against flames. Beneath the streets of Siena, the Bettini aqueduct didn't just supply drinking water. Its branching tunnels fed over 25 public fountains strategically placed near market squares and dense housing. These weren't just decorative. During the Great Fire of 1390, citizens formed bucket chains from these fountains, drawing water faster than flames could spread. The system's genius lay in its gravity-fed design. Water flowed continuously through terracotta pipes, maintaining pressure even during droughts. Other cities took fire prevention even further. In 14th century Nuremberg, officials installed wooden pipelines beneath major streets, connecting to hidden cisterns that could be tapped in emergencies. Pressure valves made of hollowed oak trunks allowed firefighters to redirect water flow to burning districts. Some German towns like Lübeck went a step further, employing the first organized fire brigade teams of specially trained Wasserwerfer, who used leather hoses to spray pressurized water from underground reservoirs. Their secret weapon, networks of fire wells, vertical shafts dug at key intersections, lined with watertight clay and capped with iron grates. When flames erupted, teams would rip off the covers to access thousands of gallons stored below. The real innovation came in fireproofing the infrastructure itself. After London's Great Fire of 1666, those slightly post-medieval builders rediscovered ancient Roman techniques, using underground channels to supply water to new brick buildings. But medieval engineers had already pioneered this approach. In Italian cities like Bologna, authorities mandated that wealthy households maintain private water tanks beneath their palazzos, connected to street-level spigots. During fires, these became communal resources, with fines imposed on anyone who refused access. Even castle designs incorporated firefighting features. Arrow slits along curtain walls doubled as hose ports, allowing defenders to douse flames, scaling wooden siege engines. What's astonishing is how these systems adapted to local materials. In Scandinavia, where wood was abundant but stone scarce, towns built brandgater, literally fire streets, underground channels lined with fire-resistant birch bark. Dutch cities leveraged their canal networks, installing submerged wooden conduits that could be activated by opening sluice gates, flooding streets just enough to create fire breaks. Meanwhile, in Moorish Spain, the Alhambra's advanced hydraulics included underground clay pipes that could douse entire courtyards from hidden outlets, a precaution against both accidents and arson during sieges. The ultimate test came during wartime, when attackers firebombed cities, as the Mongols did to Kiev in 1240. Underground systems meant survival. Chronicles describe how citizens of Metz fled to crypts beneath their cathedral during a 13th century siege, surviving the inferno above because the stone vaults had been deliberately built over natural springs. These weren't just engineering feats, they were psychological armor. Knowing water waited beneath their feet gave medieval citizens courage to rebuild again and again. And in that resilience, we see the birth of modern urban safety, proof that the best defenses often lie where we least expect them. Beneath the candlelit streets of medieval cities, another world of devotion thrived. Hidden chapels carved into bedrock, crypts concealed behind false walls, and tunnels leading to secret altars. These underground sanctuaries weren't just places of worship, they were acts of defiance. When the Christian catacombs of Rome were rediscovered in the 16th century, they revealed something astonishing: miles of tunnels lined with tombs and chapels where early Christians had gathered illegally under the noses of Roman authorities. Fast forward to the Middle Ages, and the same ingenuity flourished. In Cappadocia, Turkey, entire churches were hollowed out of soft volcanic rock, their domed ceilings painted with vibrant frescoes of saints and biblical scenes, all invisible from the surface. The design of these spaces was as practical as it was spiritual. Narrow entrance shafts, like those in the crypts of St. Paul's Basilica in Rome, could be quickly sealed with stones if authorities raided the area. Some chapels, like the underground oratory of St. Clement, were built atop ancient pagan temples, a symbolic reclaiming of sacred space. Others incorporated natural features for clandestine worship. The cave churches of Matera, Italy, used acoustically perfect chambers to amplify whispered prayers, while in Ethiopia's Lalibela, tunnels connected 11 monolithic churches carved below ground, allowing priests to move unseen during times of persecution. But these hidden places weren't just about survival, they were artistic masterpieces. The catacombs of Paris, though later expanded, began as medieval limestone quarries repurposed for burials, their walls etched with intricate carvings of skeletons and crosses. In Kiev, the Pechersk Lavra Monastery's labyrinthine caves housed mummified monks, their preserved bodies displayed in glass coffins alongside 17th-century votive paintings. Even the humblest underground chapels often featured holy graffiti, crude but heartfelt carvings of crosses or saints scratched into walls by generations of worshippers. What's often overlooked is how these spaces fostered community. In Spain's Alpujarras region, persecuted Moriscos Muslims forced to convert to Christianity secretly maintained Islamic prayer rooms beneath their homes, complete with mihrabs pointing toward Mecca. Similarly, Jewish communities in medieval York reportedly gathered in a subterranean chamber near Clifford's Tower, its existence hinted at in coded merchant records. These spaces weren't just refuges, they kept cultural identity alive under threat of execution. The legacy of these underground sanctuaries endures in unexpected ways. Modern archaeologists using ground-penetrating radar in Vienna recently uncovered a previously unknown crypt beneath a shopping district, its walls covered in 12th-century murals of the Last Judgment. And in Malta, where the Knights of St. John once hid refugees in rock-cut chapels during Ottoman raids, those same tunnels sheltered civilians from World War II bombings centuries later. The lesson written in stone and fresco is clear. When faith is forced underground, it doesn't disappear, it digs deeper, leaving echoes that outlast empires. While the towering cathedrals and bustling market squares defined medieval cities above ground, beneath the surface thrived a shadow economy, hidden markets where merchants dodged taxes, traded forbidden goods, and kept commerce alive during the worst of times. Beneath Edinburgh's Royal Mile, a warren of vaults originally built as storage cellars transformed into a subterranean marketplace by the 1700s. Butchers salted meat in stone-lined chambers, cobblers hammered leather in low-ceilinged workshops, and illicit taverns served ale to patrons who'd rather avoid the watchful eyes of tax collectors above. These weren't just crude basements, some vaults featured brick archways designed to amplify the sound of approaching authorities, giving smugglers precious seconds to hide contraband. Half a continent away, Istanbul's Basilica cistern took on a second life during droughts. When the city's reservoirs ran low, the vast underground chamber, built by Emperor Justinian in the 6th century, became a temporary marketplace. Merchants laid planks over the shallow remaining water, setting up stalls where the echoes of dripping water mixed with haggling voices. the cistern's famous Medusa head columns, repurposed from Roman ruins, silently witnessed deals for spices, silks, and slaves. This adaptability was typical when surface trade routes became dangerous during wars or epidemics. Commerce simply moved underground. Some subterranean markets specialized in the illicit. Beneath the French city of Provence, tunnels connecting wealthy merchants' homes doubled as secret exchange points for Flemish wool and Italian silks, allowing traders to bypass steep feudal tariffs. In Germany's Regensburg, Jewish merchants forced to live outside city walls dug tunnels to reach the marketplace, creating hidden access points to maintain their livelihoods despite persecution. Even religious institutions got involved. The catacombs beneath Rome's churches became hubs for selling relics, both genuine and forged, to pilgrims desperate for holy souvenirs. The ingenuity of these underground markets often matched their secrecy. In York, England, narrow, snickelways, hidden passageways between buildings concealed entrances to underground trading halls where merchants could weigh goods on stone scales embedded in the floors. Moorish cities like Granada had subterranean souks with ventilation shafts disguised as chimneys, keeping air fresh while hiding the activity below. And in Prague, the twisting tunnels beneath the old town square hosted alchemists' markets where mysterious powders and elixirs changed hands under torchlight. What's remarkable is how these spaces balanced practicality and stealth. The vaults beneath Edinburgh's South Bridge, for instance, included punishment stones, holes where drunkards were locked overnight, ensuring rowdy traders didn't attract unwanted attention. Other markets, like those in Istanbul's Grand Bazaar basements, featured stone counters with hidden compartments for quickly stashing valuable spices during inspections. The underground economy wasn't just about evading authority, it was about preserving normalcy when the world above turned chaotic. During the Black Death, when fear of contagion emptied surface markets, deals for plague remedies and food staples continued in the relative safety of cellars and tunnels. The legacy of these hidden markets lingers in unexpected ways. Modern archaeologists studying Norwich's underground tunnels recently found centuries-old chicken bones with distinctive cut marks, evidence of an underground kosher poultry trade that operated despite medieval England's expulsion of Jews. And in Edinburgh, where the vaults are now tourist attractions, you can still see grooves worn into stone steps by generations of merchants dragging sacks of grain. These silent marks tell a story of resilience, proof that when sunlight became dangerous, medieval commerce simply learned to thrive in the shadows. Justice in medieval cities wasn't just about punishment, it was psychological warfare waged in darkness. Step into the oubliette of Château de Loches, France, and you'll understand the true meaning of terror. Named from the French word oublier, meaning to forget, these bottle-shaped pits dropped prisoners through a narrow ceiling opening into absolute blackness. The design was diabolically simple: no stairs, no light, just slick walls impossible to climb. Prisoners might hear feasts echoing from the halls above as they stood knee-deep in their own waste, forgotten until starvation silenced them. But France didn't corner the market on cruelty. Beneath London's Southwark district, the clink prison cells were so damp that moss grew on prisoners' clothing within weeks. Iron rings bolted to walls held chains that rubbed skin raw, while the stench of the nearby Thames seeped through cracks, turning air into a visible fog. What made these spaces truly horrifying wasn't just their physical conditions, it was their legal ambiguity. Many dungeons operated outside formal justice systems. In Venice's infamous Piombi prison, located directly under the lead-covered Doge's palace roof, prisoners baked in summer and froze in winter without ever seeing a judge. The underground cells of Nuremberg's Lugensland Tower had a more theatrical cruelty: tiny windows positioned so prisoners could see the city's gallows being erected. knowing their turn was coming. Even royalty weren't immune. When King James I of Scotland wanted to eliminate rivals, he used the Bottle Dungeon of St. Andrew's Castle, a 22-foot-deep pit carved into solid rock where victims could scream for days without being heard. The engineering behind these prisons reveals a dark ingenuity. Some, like the dungeons beneath Berg Eltz in Germany, featured angling cells, sloped floors that made it impossible to lie down or sit comfortably for weeks. Others used acoustics as torture. The echo chamber beneath Sicily's Castello Ursino amplified guards' footsteps to keep prisoners in constant anticipation of abuse. But perhaps the most psychologically devastating were the light cells found in some Austrian castles. After months in darkness, prisoners would be moved to cells with a tiny window high up, just enough to see the outside world they'd never reach again. These spaces weren't just about punishment, they were economic engines. The Clink's warden charged inmates for everything from straw bedding to removal of leg irons, creating a perverse profit model. Wealthy prisoners in the Tower of London could rent luxury cells with fireplaces, while the poor suffocated in shared underground pits. Records from Paris's conciergerie show prisoners paid bribes just to be moved slightly closer to ventilation shafts. What's chilling is how many of these medieval techniques persist. The oubliette's concept of sensory deprivation re-emerged in 20th century solitary confinement practices. The psychological torment of the light cell mirrors modern, white room torture. Even the profit motive continues. Some American prisons today charge inmates for basic necessities. These underground chambers weren't just relics of barbarism, they were laboratories for perfecting control, proving that when societies want to dehumanize, they often start by digging downward. Siege warfare wasn't just about battering rams and scaling ladders, it was an underground chess match where victory went to those who could outdig their enemies. Beneath the smoke-choked battlefields, teams of specialized miners known as sappers worked in pitch darkness, their picks striking rhythmically as they carved tunnels toward enemy walls. But defenders weren't sitting idle, they were listening. At Carcassonne, French engineers developed an ingenious early warning system, bronze bowls filled with water placed at intervals along the walls. The slightest vibration from enemy digging would send ripples across the surface, revealing the attacker's location. Once detected, the real subterranean battle began. Defenders would frantically dig their own tunnels called countermines to intercept the attackers underground. These weren't straight passages but winding labyrinths designed to confuse invaders. When opposing tunnels collided, brutal hand-to-hand combat erupted in claustrophobic darkness, fought with picks, daggers, and flaming oil. Some castles, like Crac des Chevaliers in Syria, built permanent underground listening galleries, narrow shafts that amplified the sound of digging from hundreds of yards away. Others employed bell mines, hollow chambers filled with dry twigs that would snap loudly if enemy tunnels approached. The most sophisticated systems turned tunnels into death traps. At the Siege of Rochester in 1215, King John's miners dug beneath a corner tower of the castle, propping it up with wooden beams soaked in pig fat. When they set the supports alight, the tower collapsed spectacularly, but the defenders had anticipated this. They'd secretly reinforced the inner wall, forcing the attackers to repeat the dangerous mining operation a second time. In Byzantium, engineers wrote manuals on countermining techniques, advising defenders to pack tunnels with combustible materials that could be ignited to suffocate attackers in smoke. This underground warfare reached its peak during the Ottoman siege of Rhodes in 1480. The Knights Hospitaller defending the island discovered Turkish mining attempts by lowering candles into suspicious cracks. If the flame flickered oddly, it revealed hidden air currents from enemy tunnels. They responded by digging countermines that intersected the Ottoman shafts, then flooding them with a noxious mix of boiling water, quicklime, and crushed scorpions. The besiegers retaliated by packing tunnels with gunpowder, one of the earliest uses of underground explosives in warfare. What made these subterranean battles so terrifying was their unpredictability. Miners might break through a wall only to find defenders waiting with bellows pumping smoke into the tunnel. Some castles, like Dover, had murder holes in their underground passages, openings through which defenders could pour burning sand onto invaders below. The psychological toll was immense. Soldiers reported hearing ghostly tapping sounds from invisible enemies digging beneath their feet. The legacy of these underground battles lives on in modern warfare, from the trench tunnels of World War I to the Viet Cong's Kukai network. But medieval engineers had mastered the art centuries earlier, proving that sometimes the most decisive battles weren't fought under open skies, but in the suffocating darkness beneath the earth. In the shadows of medieval cities, where a whispered word could topple kings or spark rebellions, espionage wasn't just a profession, it was an architectural art form. Take the winding tunnels beneath the French village of Rennes-le-Château, where the mysterious priory of Sion allegedly operated. These weren't just escape routes, they were information highways. Secret emissaries could traverse entire neighborhoods unseen, emerging through innocuous-looking cellar doors or disguised as priests in underground chapels. But the real genius lay in the details. Some passages had grooves carved into walls to guide messengers by touch in total darkness, while others featured false dead ends that only opened if you pressed a specific stone. Whispering galleries took subterranean secrecy to another level. Beneath the ducal palace of Mantua, Italy, a narrow corridor with a parabolic ceiling allowed conspirators to speak softly at one end while listeners at the opposite curve heard every word clearly, a medieval version of wiretapping. Similar acoustic tricks existed in the tunnels beneath Edinburgh's Castle Rock, where rebel lords could plot against English rule without fear of eavesdroppers. Even children's games hid espionage tools. Historians believe the talking tubes found in some German castles, made of hollow reeds embedded in walls, may have been used to gather intelligence from unsuspecting guests in chambers above. The most sophisticated systems combined multiple deception techniques. In Prague's Jewish quarter, a network of tunnels connecting synagogues and merchant homes included mirror gates and angled metal plates that reflected torchlight to signal safe passage or danger. Venetian spies operating from the Doge's palace used underwater tunnels with listening tubes that amplified voices from gondolas docking above. And beneath the Moorish palace of Alhambra, water channels doubled as message carriers. Notes sealed in wax balls would float from one sector to another, invisible to surface observers. What made these systems truly formidable was their adaptability. During the Wars of the Roses, Yorkist spies reportedly used London's sewer channels to track Lancastrian troop movements by the vibrations their marching left in stagnant water. In Constantinople, Byzantine agents employed the city's vast cisterns as meeting points, their voices masked by the constant dripping of water. Even religious institutions participated. Monks at Cluny Abbey maintained a network of tunnels with coded frescoes that guided messengers to safe houses. The legacy of these covert networks lingers in modern intelligence tradecraft. The CIA's Cold War era Moscow rules for clandestine meetings echo medieval practices like leaving chalk marks on certain stones to signal safety. And when archaeologists recently uncovered a tunnel beneath Windsor Castle with medieval carvings of eyes and ears, they realized they'd found a literal spy hole, a vantage point where watchers could monitor visitors long before they reached the gates. These hidden passageways weren't just about moving bodies unseen. They were about controlling the most precious commodity of all, information. and in that shadow war, the cities with the best underground connections often held the winning hand. Beneath the surface of medieval cities, where most tunnels served practical purposes, some passages whispered in symbols and shadows, carved with messages meant only for certain eyes. The walls of Rosslyn Chapel's underground vaults in Scotland tell one such story. Every inch of stone seems alive with intricate carvings, not just religious icons, but strange botanical specimens like maize and aloe, plants unknown to Europe before Columbus. Why would medieval artisans depict New World flora decades before its discovery? Some believe these were coded messages from the Knights Templar, hinting at transatlantic voyages they'd kept secret. Others argue the carvings represent alchemical recipes, with each plant symbolizing an ingredient in the quest for the Philosopher's Stone. Prague's underground tells an even darker tale. Beneath the streets of the old town, tunnels connecting ancient alchemy labs are scarred with peculiar symbols, inverted triangles inside circles, serpents swallowing their own tails, and cryptic numerals scratched into doorways. These weren't random graffiti. Emperor Rudolph Roman II, obsessed with the occult, employed hundreds of alchemists in the late 1500s, turning the city into a hub of esoteric experimentation. The markings served dual purposes. Some warned initiates of dangerous chemical mixtures stored behind certain doors, while others allegedly marked burial sites for failed experiments. Workers restoring the tunnels in 1989 uncovered a sealed chamber filled with glass alembics still holding traces of mercury and gold, proof that these symbols weren't just superstition. But not all underground art was so sinister. In the catacombs of Odessa, Ukraine, smugglers during the Crimean War transformed limestone tunnels into an underground gallery. Delicate ship carvings marked routes to hidden Black Sea coves, while caricatures of corrupt officials served as both humor and warning. Similarly, beneath Vienna's Stephansdom Cathedral, 12th century masons left bankers' marks, personal symbols chiseled into stone to claim payment for their work. These weren't signatures in the modern sense, but a complex system where each mark represented a specific skill set or hours worked, a medieval version of itemized billing. The most haunting symbols often blended art with engineering. In the water tunnels beneath Malta's capital Valletta, the Knights of St. John carved crosses at every intersection, not just as religious symbols, but as flow markers indicating current direction for maintenance crews. Some crosses were intentionally lopsided, secretly pointing toward emergency exits. Meanwhile, in the labyrinth under Chartres Cathedral, pilgrims following a maze pattern on the floor would unknowingly trace the same path as underground streams beneath their feet, a physical metaphor for spiritual seeking. What unites these disparate examples is their layered purpose. A carving might guide a traveler, conceal a treasure map, or encode heretical belief, sometimes all three simultaneously. Modern laser scans of the tunnels beneath Rome's Basilica of San Clement revealed previously invisible symbols, early Christian fish motifs hidden beneath medieval frescoes, themselves covered by Renaissance artwork. Like the cities above them, these underground galleries were palimpsests, constantly rewritten but never fully erasing what came before. Perhaps the most poignant example lies in the chalk mines beneath Dover, England. During World War II, soldiers stationed there to prevent German invasion left hundreds of carvings, regimental badges, sweethearts' names, even surprisingly skilled portraits. But among them are older markings, 17th century smugglers' codes, and remarkably, faint medieval crosses from when the tunnels served as secret chapels during religious persecutions. These silent symbols spanning centuries remind us that underground spaces didn't just preserve bodies or goods, they safeguarded identity, memory, and hope in times when light was dangerous. As we piece together these fragmentary messages, one truth emerges. Medieval people didn't just dig for survival. They carved, painted, and encoded their deepest fears and highest aspirations into the very earth that sheltered them. The walls weren't blank, they were diaries, textbooks, and canvases for those who needed to speak without being heard. And now, centuries later, their whispers are finally rising to the surface. In the crowded streets of medieval cities, noise was more than just a nuisance. It could mean the difference between sanity and chaos. Imagine living above a blacksmith's workshop, where the clang of hammer on anvil began at dawn, or next to a market square where merchants hawked their wares until dusk. Without modern soundproofing, cities turned to the earth itself for relief. Beneath St. Paul's Cathedral in London, architects designed a whispering gallery, a curved underground passage where sound traveled so clearly that a murmur against one wall could be heard 50 feet away. This wasn't just a curiosity, it was an early experiment in acoustic control, proving that the shape and material of spaces could manipulate sound in remarkable ways. Other cities took a more practical approach. In the Moorish city of Granada, engineers built underground channels beneath busy streets to divert the noise of carts and animals away from residential areas. These tunnels acted like natural mufflers, their earthen walls absorbing vibrations before they reached the homes above. Similarly, beneath the monasteries of Cluny in France, monks carved out subterranean scriptoriums with walls lined with wool and straw, a medieval version of sound-absorbing panels that allowed scribes to concentrate for hours without disturbance. Even the placement of wells became an acoustic strategy. In Siena, circular stone wells were positioned at key intersections, not just for water, but to act as resonance chambers that swallowed street noise rather than echoing it back. The ingenuity didn't stop there. Some castles featured silent floors, wooden planks laid over a bed of sand in underground corridors to deaden the footsteps of guards. Venetian diplomats reportedly met in windowless basement chambers lined with thick tapestries to prevent eavesdropping, while in Prague, alchemists built spiral staircases with irregular steps to disrupt sound waves and keep their conversations private. These techniques reveal a sophisticated understanding of acoustics long before the science was formally studied. Perhaps the most surprising discovery came from recent scans of Edinburgh's underground vaults. Archaeologists found that certain walls were intentionally built with gaps filled with crushed shells, a material now known to scatter sound waves. Whether by accident or design, medieval builders had stumbled upon principles that modern architects use in concert halls today. This hidden battle against noise wasn't just about comfort, it was about power. Cathedrals used reverberant underground crypts to make chants sound more divine, while merchants in Bruges dampened cellar walls to muffle the clink of coins during secret deals. Even the infamous oubliette prisons played with acoustics. Their smooth, rounded walls amplified the cries of prisoners to unsettle new arrivals. In a world where walls could talk, those who mastered silence held the upper hand. As dusk fell over these cities, the underground offered one final acoustic gift, the gentle hush of earth itself. Tunnels dug below the frost line stayed eerily quiet in winter, their stillness a stark contrast to the chaos above. For those who knew where to listen, the medieval city wasn't just a place of clamor, it was a symphony of controlled sound, with every echo and silence carefully engineered. And as we'll soon see, these same spaces that brought peace could also pulse with life when the workday ended and the underground became a playground. Beneath the grime and toil of medieval life pulsed an unexpected heartbeat, the raucous laughter and clinking cups of underground taverns. While we often picture the Middle Ages as all hardship and piety, city dwellers knew how to let loose, and they did so in the most ingenious places. Take Edinburgh's infamous South Bridge vaults, where 18th-century workers carrying on medieval traditions ducked into candlelit cellars to gamble on dice games carved directly into stone tables. The ceilings were so low patrons had to stoop, adding to the thrill of secrecy. But these weren't just drinking holes. Some subterranean spaces hosted elaborate entertainments. Beneath the streets of Ghent, archaeologists uncovered a network of tunnels leading to a vaulted chamber with a small stage and rows of stone benches, suggesting underground theatrical performances as early as the 1400s. What made these hidden venues so appealing? For starters, they offered freedom from prying eyes. In cities where the church regulated morality, underground taverns became havens for forbidden pleasures. Parisian records mention cellar academies, where students recited bawdy poetry away from clerical censors. Venetian gamblers favored tunnels beneath the Rialto, where the constant lapping of canal water masked the sound of rolling dice. Even the clergy indulged. Beneath Canterbury Cathedral, a secret wine cellar doubled as a card-playing den for off-duty monks, its walls scratched with tally marks tracking their debts. The logistics of these spaces reveal medieval ingenuity. Without natural light, ventilation was key. York's underground pubs used clever chimney systems disguised as ordinary house fireplaces to draw out smoke and smells. In Prague, brewers stored barrels in cool limestone tunnels that naturally regulated temperature, creating the perfect conditions for fermenting ale. Some establishments, like the mysterious Black Dog Tavern beneath Exeter, had hidden trapdoors leading to escape routes, a necessary feature when authorities raided illegal gambling operations. But underground entertainment wasn't just about rebellion, it was also about community. Beneath the German town of Rothenburg, guilds held feasts in expansive wine cellars, their walls lined with barrels bearing each member's personalized crest. In Bruges, fishermen's wives gathered in candlelit wool storage vaults to sing folk songs while mending nets. These spaces provided warmth in winter and cool retreats in summer, becoming year-round social hubs. The most surprising discovery, some underground venues catered to high society. Beneath London's Strand, aristocrats attended clandestine concerts in a lavishly decorated chamber now known as the Roman Bath, its walls still bearing medieval frescoes of musicians. Similar elite hideaways existed beneath palaces in Naples and Barcelona, where nobility could enjoy minstrel performances away from the crowds. What faded first wasn't the tradition, but the secrecy. As surface taverns grew more tolerant, underground entertainment gradually lost its illicit charm. Yet echoes remain. Modern visitors to Edinburgh's vaults sometimes report hearing ghostly laughter or the phantom rattle of dice, reminders that beneath every medieval city's solemn facade lay a hidden world that knew how to revel in darkness. While these shadowy taverns provided escape through merriment, other underground spaces pursued a different kind of liberation, the unraveling of nature's mysteries through science. And it's to those dimly lit chambers of experimentation we now turn. Beneath the flickering torchlight of medieval Prague, a world of bubbling flasks and cryptic symbols thrived in hidden chambers. Alchemists, those enigmatic figures straddling magic and science, carved out secret workshops where they pursued the ultimate prize, the philosopher's stone. This mythical substance wasn't just about turning lead into gold. It promised eternal life and spiritual enlightenment. Emperor Rudolf Roman II's obsession with alchemy transformed Prague into Europe's underground laboratory capital, attracting minds like John Dee and Edward Kelly. Their workplaces weren't ordinary rooms, they were carefully designed spaces with ventilation shafts to carry away toxic mercury fumes, stone tables resistant to acid burns, and niches for precisely weighing materials to the grain. The equipment found in these labs reveals astonishing sophistication. excavations beneath Paris's Latin Quarter uncovered 15th century alembics distillation apparatuses made of glass so pure modern chemists struggle to replicate their clarity. In Nuremberg, metallurgists working in vaults beneath churches developed crucible steel a century before Damascus blades became famous. These weren't backyard tinkerers. They were early materials scientists whose failed experiments with alloys accidentally created stunning stained glass colors still visible in Gothic cathedrals. Medicine also took leaps forward in these subterranean spaces. Beneath the University of Salerno, Europe's first medical school, tunnels housed anatomy theaters where professors dissected cadavers by lamplight, challenging church prohibitions. Their discoveries about blood circulation and organ functions were recorded in coded manuscripts, hidden between recipes for elixirs of life. Some of these potions actually worked. Recent analysis of a 12th century love potion from a Vienna tunnel lab contained willow bark, a natural painkiller, and digitalis compounds that could regulate heartbeats. The real legacy of these underground labs lies in their methodology. Alchemists developed precursor techniques to the modern scientific method: meticulous note-taking, peer verification, and repeatable experiments. Their symbols for elements evolved into today's chemical notation. When a fire destroyed part of Prague's alchemy district in 1591, the surviving records show researchers comparing results across Europe through clandestine networks of messengers. What makes these spaces truly remarkable is their duality. The same tunnels that hosted mystical quests for eternal youth also birthed practical breakthroughs. The ink used in Gutenberg's Bible developed in a Mainz cellar workshop where alchemists experimented with iron gall formulations, the vivid red dye that made Venetian wool famous. A happy accident from an underground mercury sulfide experiment. Even the concept of laboratory safety gear began here. Leather aprons and glass-face shields appear in illustrations from a 1480 Florentine manuscript on subterranean chemistry. As these hidden experiments laid the foundations for modern science, another underground revolution was unfolding, one that would determine whether cities could grow beyond their walls. The solutions medieval engineers devised for expanding urban spaces would prove just as ingenious as any alchemical transformation. When cities could no longer sprawl outward, medieval engineers faced a radical solution: digging deeper into the earth itself. Edinburgh became the textbook example of this vertical expansion, its old town growing downward like inverted skyscrapers. By the 16th century, entire neighborhoods lived in the underground closes, multi-story structures buried beneath the Royal Mile where merchants, craftsmen, and even wealthy families occupied vaulted chambers stacked like stone pancakes. These weren't crude dugouts but sophisticated living spaces with built-in drainage, ventilation shafts disguised as chimneys, and interconnected passages allowing residents to bypass crowded streets above. The most remarkable feature, some lower levels remained inhabited well into the 1800s, their occupants oblivious to the modern city growing above their heads. Other cities developed their own subterranean solutions. In Italy's hilltop town of Orvieto, Etruscan-era tunnels were expanded into vertical neighborhoods during medieval population booms. Houses featured trapdoors leading to underground kitchens and workshops, while shared community wells dug through multiple levels provided water without taxing surface resources. Meanwhile, in the French village of Chinon, wine growers built tiered cellars directly beneath their homes. The deeper the cellar, the more prestigious the vintage. This stacking of functions wasn't just practical, it redefined urban space. A single footprint could now house production, storage, and living quarters across multiple subterranean levels. The engineering challenges were immense. Without modern reinforcement techniques, builders relied on clever weight distribution. Edinburgh's underground closets used interlocking stone arches to transfer pressure outward, while in the Turkish region of Cappadocia, entire underground cities like Derinkuyu featured centralized ventilation shafts that doubled as structural pillars. Some cities even developed early zoning laws. Nottingham's sandstone caves had designated residential, commercial, and industrial levels to prevent candle makers from accidentally igniting wool storerooms. What's often overlooked is how these underground expansions shaped social structures. In Edinburgh, the deepest levels became affordable housing for the working poor, creating a literal vertical class system. Conversely, in the Spanish city of Cuenca, wealthy families built downward to create private libraries and chapels beneath their mansions, turning basement space into a status symbol. The underground wasn't just extra room, it was a canvas for reinventing urban life. The legacy of these medieval density solutions echoes in surprising ways. Modern Tokyo's underground retail complexes mirror Edinburgh's vaulted closes, while Montreal's réseau network of subterranean walkways owes its concept to the tunnel-linked guild halls of medieval Bruges. Even contemporary green architecture draws inspiration from these ancient techniques. Earth-sheltered buildings now use medieval principles of thermal mass and natural insulation. The lesson carved in stone beneath these cities is clear. When horizontal growth fails, human ingenuity doesn't rise, it descends. As we examine these layered urban landscapes, another profound use of underground space emerges, one not for the living but for honoring the dead. The transition from crowded vertical cities to their silent counterparts beneath the surface reveals medieval societies grappling with mortality on an unprecedented scale. Death reshaped medieval cities not just above ground, but beneath them, where the sheer volume of bodies forced engineers to become architects of the afterlife. The Paris catacombs tell perhaps the most haunting story. Originally limestone quarries, these tunnels became the final resting place for over 6 million souls when overflowing cemeteries threatened public health. But this wasn't just practical disposal, it was macabre artistry. Skull-lined arches and femurs stacked like firewood transformed the tunnels into a memento mori on an unimaginable scale. Workers arranging these displays followed strict patterns, creating stripes and chevrons from tibias, or filling chapel niches with skulls facing outward like a silent congregation. The effect wasn't accidental. It forced visitors to confront mortality while maintaining reverence for the dead. Rome's catacombs reveal an earlier chapter in this underground relationship with death. Along the Appian Way, early Christians dug over 375 miles of tunnels, burying martyrs beside merchants in shelf-like niches called loculi. What seems chaotic today was actually meticulously organized. Families purchased vertical plots, stacking generations like books on a shelf. Symbols carved into the soft tufa stone, fish, anchors, doves served both as spiritual markers and practical wayfinding for mourners navigating the gloom. Some tunnels even featured refrigerium chambers where families shared ritual meals with the deceased, blending pagan traditions with new faith. But not all mass burials were so orderly. During the Great Plague of London in 1665, the city's plague pits swallowed victims by the cartload. At East Smithfield, archaeologists uncovered a trench over 100 feet long where bodies were laid shoulder to shoulder in layers separated by quicklime, a grim assembly line of mortality. Yet even here, care was evident. Some skeletons were found clasping pilgrim badges or wrapped in linen shrouds, small dignities preserved amidst the horror. The engineering behind these spaces reveals as much about medieval values as the burials themselves. Venetian ossuaries on the island of Sant'Ariano used tidal channels to naturally cleanse bones before their final placement. In Austria's Hallstatt charnel house, skulls were painted with floral motifs, and the deceased's occupation a personalized memorial when grave space ran out. These adaptations show societies grappling with unimaginable loss while clinging to identity and ritual. What's often overlooked is how these burial practices shaped living cities. Paris's decision to relocate bones to the catacombs in the 1780s wasn't just about hygiene. It freed up prime real estate where cemeteries once stood, allowing the bustling boulevard Saint-Germain to emerge. Similarly, London's plague pits became inadvertent foundations. The National Gallery now stands atop one such mass grave, its masterpieces shadowed by the dead below. The true lesson of these spaces lies in their duality. They were both practical solutions and profound psychological coping mechanisms. By burying their dead beneath their feet, medieval people didn't just manage space, they kept mortality close, visible, yet at arm's length. A reminder that life continued even as the earth beneath them grew heavier with memory. And when death came not in steady drips but in devastating waves, these underground systems would face their greatest test not from overcrowding, but from a silent killer that respected neither rank nor ritual. When the Black Death swept through Europe in the 14th century, it didn't just kill, it overwhelmed cities with corpses faster than tradition could handle. London's churchyard of the Holy Trinity became a grim example. What once held a few hundred graves suddenly swallowed over 50,000 bodies in a single year. But this wasn't haphazard burial, it was crisis engineering. Teams of plague diggers worked through the night, carving trenches 20 feet deep beneath churchyards and vacant lots. At East Smithfield, archaeologists later uncovered layered pits where bodies were stacked like cordwood, each stratum separated by quicklime to accelerate decomposition, and they hoped contained the miasma thought to spread disease. Some pits were so vast they required wooden ramps for carts to descend, their wheels leaving permanent ruts in the tunnel walls. Venice faced a different challenge. As corpses piled up on its islands, the city's solution was both brutal and brilliant. The Lazaretto Vecchio, a quarantine complex with underground tunnels connecting isolation wards. New arrivals, some sick, some merely suspected, descended into a labyrinth where colored tiles on the walls directed them, red for the infected, green for those awaiting clearance. The tunnels weren't just passages, they were decontamination zones. Guards pushed food through hatches using long poles, while sani, or health officials, observed through peepholes carved at angles to avoid direct exposure. The most haunting feature, a submerged chamber where clothing and belongings were lowered into seawater mixed with vinegar, an early attempt at sterilization. These desperate measures left archaeological gold mines. In 17th century Marseille, construction workers uncovered a plague pit so perfectly preserved that the arrangement of skeletons revealed triage protocols, children tucked near the edges, adults clustered in the center. In Edinburgh, the Merry King's Close tunnels became inadvertent time capsules when sealed after outbreaks, preserving everyday objects dropped in panic. A child's shoe here, a merchant's ledger there, frozen in the moment catastrophe struck. The psychological toll of these spaces lingers in folklore. London's Charterhouse, built over a plague pit, reportedly had monks who heard knocking from below, not ghosts, but the sound of collapsing burial shrouds as bodies decomposed. Venetian quarantine tunnels inspired the word quaranta, meaning 40, for the days of isolation required, but also gave us lazaretto, a term still used for isolation hospitals today. What's often forgotten is how these crisis responses shaped modern cities. Paris's decision to empty cemeteries into the catacombs after repeated plagues created the underground labyrinth we know today. London's plague pits inadvertently stabilized the soil for future skyscrapers, and Venice's tunnels became the blueprint for today's biocontainment protocols, proving that even in humanity's darkest hours, the solutions we dig in desperation can outlast the crises that birthed them. Beneath the flickering torchlight of medieval strongholds, treasure wasn't just hidden, it was defended with lethal creativity. Without modern banks, wealth took the form of gold reliquaries, land deeds sealed in lead tubes, and sacks of silver coins, all requiring protection from thieves and invaders. The Knights Templar, Europe's wealthiest and most mysterious order, mastered this art. Beneath their Paris temple, a labyrinth of vaults held not just the crowns of kings but something far more valuable, their financial records. These tunnels functioned as the medieval equivalent of a high-security data center, where promissory notes and debt ledgers were stored alongside chests of Byzantine gold. The real genius lay in their security. False floors collapsed into pits lined with spikes, and air vents were deliberately narrowed to suffocate anyone who lingered too long searching for hidden compartments. But the Templars weren't alone in their subterranean banking. Beneath the Doge's Palace in Venice, the Camera degli Imprestiti Chamber of Loans featured an ingenious dual lock system. 2 keys were required to open the vault, one held by a noble, the other by a merchant, ensuring no single person could access the city's emergency war chest. In Nuremberg, the Schatzkammer tunnels beneath the town hall stored the Reichskleinodien, the imperial regalia of the Holy Roman Empire, behind a door that could only be unlocked when 7 different council members turned their individual keys simultaneously. Religious institutions took vault security to theatrical extremes. Beneath Canterbury Cathedral, the Scrinium vault protected charters in an iron-bound chest chained to the wall, while a hollow statue of St. Thomas Becket nearby concealed a mechanism that would drop a weighted net onto intruders. Even small towns got inventive. The underground strongroom of Rothenburg ob der Tauber included a weeping chamber where water would slowly flood the space if the wrong combination of stones was removed from the entrance wall. The most surprising treasures weren't always gold. Beneath Prague's Old Town Hall, archaeologists found a sealed chamber containing 1,200 uncut gemstones not stored for their value, but as collateral for loans to local jewelers. In the tunnels of Mont Saint-Michel, abbots kept duplicate copies of every manuscript in their scriptorium, creating an early version of off-site backup storage. And beneath the Moorish palace of Alhambra, a vault lined with cedarwood held something priceless: meticulously detailed irrigation maps of the entire kingdom, ensuring agricultural knowledge would survive even if the surface was sacked. What united these diverse vaults was their psychological warfare. Many featured decoy treasures, lead coins painted gold, or chests filled with rocks to frustrate thieves. Others employed sound manipulation. The Templar tunnels near Acre included a corridor where footsteps echoed unnaturally, convincing intruders they were being followed. The lesson was clear: in a world without insurance or police, security wasn't just about locks. It was about messing with intruders' minds until they fled empty-handed. The legacy of these medieval vaults echoes in modern architecture. Bank vaults still use Templar-inspired delay tactics like time locks, while data centers emulate the Templars' distributed storage with off-site servers. Even the concept of safety deposit boxes traces back to Venetian underground loan chambers. As we'll see next, these ancient innovations didn't just protect wealth, they quietly shaped the blueprint of every modern city's financial infrastructure. The cobblestone streets of medieval cities may have faded into history, but their underground innovations never truly vanished. They simply evolved beneath our feet. London's sprawling sewer system, often credited to Victorian engineer Joseph Bazalgette, actually traces its roots to the 13th century, when monks first began channeling waste through vaulted tunnels beneath the Abbey of St. Paul. Walk through the city today, and you're treading above layers of medieval masonry that still divert rainwater and sewage, their original stone channels now encased in modern brick. This isn't just preservation, it's proof that medieval engineering anticipated problems we're still solving. When Bazalgette designed his revolutionary network in the 1860s, he didn't start from scratch. He expanded the existing medieval lattice, widening tunnels but keeping their gravity-fed slopes, which had been calculated centuries earlier with astonishing precision. The influence extends far beyond sewers. Paris's catacombs, originally limestone quarries repurposed for bones in the 1700s, now house fiber optic cables that keep the city connected. The same tunnels that once stored skeletons today pulse with digital information, their cool, stable environment perfect for server farms. Even New York's subway system owes a debt to medieval precedents. Early engineers studied the ventilation shafts of Durinkuyu's underground city in Turkey when designing air circulation for their tunnels. The principles are identical. Use natural airflow patterns to prevent stagnation, a concept medieval builders grasped long before the term HVAC existed. Modern utilities also follow medieval blueprints. Beneath Tokyo's neon-lit streets, the G-cans project a massive underground floodwater diversion system, mirrors the cisterns of Constantinople, using gravity and holding chambers to manage deluges. In Munich, engineers recently discovered that a new subway line was unknowingly built along the exact path of a 14th-century salt traders' tunnel, the original route still being the most efficient. Even green architecture has embraced these ancient ideas. Earth-sheltered buildings like the California Academy of Sciences use medieval passive cooling techniques, thick earthen walls that regulate temperature without energy consumption, a trick borrowed from Cappadocia's underground dwellings. Perhaps the most unexpected legacy lies in urban resilience planning. When Hurricane Sandy flooded Manhattan in 2012, engineers realized the areas least affected were those built atop medieval-style, sponge infrastructure, parks with hidden underground reservoirs, much like London's medieval soakaways that absorbed excess rainwater. Now, cities from Copenhagen to Shanghai are reviving these concepts, creating permeable urban landscapes that work with nature rather than against it. The medieval approach wasn't just about building for the present, it was about creating systems adaptable enough to serve generations unborn. As we retrofit modern cities for climate change, we're not just rediscovering these ancient solutions, we're finally appreciating their foresight. The next time you ride a subway or watch floodwaters drain swiftly from a street, remember, you're benefiting from engineering wisdom carved in darkness 800 years ago. And beneath our feet, archaeologists are still uncovering just how much we've forgotten and how much we have left to learn. Ground-penetrating radar has peeled back layers of time like never before, revealing hidden passageways that rewrite medieval history. In York, England, archaeologists recently discovered an entirely unknown network of tunnels beneath the Shambles, a street famed for its overhanging medieval houses. The radar's ghostly images showed chambers lined with 14th-century brick, their purpose a mystery until researchers cross-referenced them with merchant guild records. Turns out, these were clandestine meeting rooms where wool traders avoided royal taxes, their existence scrubbed from official maps. Vienna's underground yielded an even more startling find. Beneath a modern parking lot, scans detected a sprawling chapel decorated with frescoes of Saint Barbara, patron saint of miners. The paintings, preserved in perfect darkness for 6 centuries, depict tools identical to those still used by the city's tunnel maintenance crews, a haunting continuity between medieval laborers and their modern counterparts. These discoveries aren't just filling in blanks, they're overturning assumptions. Take the myth of secret Templar tunnels beneath Paris. For years, treasure hunters insisted the Knights Templar dug escape routes from the temple fortress. But when engineers scanned the area during metro renovations, they uncovered something far more practical: a massive grain storage system with precise humidity controls. The real treasure wasn't gold, it was food security. Similarly, beneath Edinburgh's Royal Mile, sonar mapping revealed dead drops, small niches in tunnel walls where spies could leave messages during the 17th century witch trials. Historians had dismissed such accounts as folklore until technology made the invisible visible. The process of rediscovery is as fascinating as the finds themselves. In Newport, Wales, archaeologists using electrical resistivity tomography accidentally found a submerged medieval dock beneath a supermarket basement. The wooden pilings, preserved in oxygen-starved mud, showed intricate carvings of mermaids, possibly wardings against storms. Meanwhile, in Prague, laser scans of Charles Bridge exposed hollow chambers within its pillars, solving a centuries-old mystery. Chroniclers had written of bridge keepers who vanished for days, reappearing with reports of underground rivers. The scans proved their truth. Maintenance tunnels doubled as floodwater channels, with sediment layers matching historical records of deluges. What emerges from these high-tech excavations is a new appreciation for medieval pragmatism. Those legendary tunnels under Naples, turns out they're mostly ancient Greek aqueducts repurposed as bomb shelters in World War II. The haunted vaults of Edinburgh, their eerie acoustics come from deliberate sound baffles installed to muffle illicit whiskey distilling. Even the fabled Dracula's escape tunnel in Transylvania's Bran Castle was actually a sewage chute, glamorous myths colliding with mundane reality. Yet some discoveries deepen the mysteries. Beneath Rome's Basilica of San Giovanni, ground radar detected a previously unknown chamber lined with lead. Its purpose no one knows. In Germany's Black Forest, scans revealed a tunnel system with no entrance or exit, just a central chamber containing a single iron chair. And in Istanbul, a team using muon radiography, a technique that images through stone like X-rays, found a sealed Ottoman-era room filled with uncatalogued manuscripts and hundreds of parrot skeletons. Each find whispers that for all our technology, the underground still keeps its secrets close. As these hidden spaces resurface, they bring unexpected connections. DNA analysis of moss growing in rediscovered tunnels has traced medieval trade routes. Spores from Venetian glassmaking districts turned up in London's underground channels, proving material exchanges we never documented. In Spain's Toledo, pollen preserved in sealed tunnel air shafts revealed what crops grew outside the city walls during sieges. Even the soot on tunnel ceilings is a time capsule. Chemical signatures from medieval candles show the wax trade's fluctuations during political upheavals. The most poignant discoveries aren't grand tunnels but small, human traces. In Exeter, a child's leather shoe was found wedged in a drain, lost centuries ago during a flash flood. Beneath Bruges, a tunnel wall bears the handprint of a worker who leaned against wet lime mortar, his accidental signature surviving wars and plagues. These moments remind us that behind every engineering marvel were peoples, some planning cities, others just trying to get home before dark. Now, as we piece together this subterranean puzzle, the line between fact and folklore blinks like a guttering torch. Did medieval miners really whisper of earth dragons when they hit natural gas pockets? Were the echoing tunnels beneath Prague's castle truly used for alchemical experiments, or is that just tourist bait? The answers may lie in the next scan, the next excavation, or they may stay buried forever, feeding the legends that keep us digging. The shadowy tunnels beneath medieval cities don't just hold bones and bricks, they pulse with stories that refuse to stay buried. Take Prague Castle's labyrinth, where whispers of the golem, a clay monster brought to life by a rabbi's magic, mingle with the very real footsteps of night watchmen. Visitors swear they've seen its hulking shape in foggy courtyards, but historians point to the castle's actual 16th century alchemy labs as the likely inspiration. The truth, both versions live side by side, feeding each other. In Edinburgh's Blair Street vaults, the legend of Mr. Boots, a shadowy figure said to drag his peg leg across stone floors, grew so persistent that paranormal investigators set up infrared cameras. What they captured wasn't a ghost, but something equally eerie: perfectly preserved shoe prints in centuries-old mortar, likely left by a real leatherworker whose daily tread wore grooves into the stone. Some tales straddle the line between folklore and forensic evidence. Beneath Bran Castle in Transylvania, the so-called Dracula's escape tunnel was long dismissed as tourist bait until renovations revealed a hidden shaft lined with 15th century Ottoman arrowheads. Could this have been Vlad the Impaler's secret route during sieges? The archaeology suggests yes, but the stories transformed a practical wartime feature into a vampire's highway. Similarly, Venice's Well of the Spirits in the Doge's Palace was thought to be named for executed prisoners' ghosts. Then divers found its underwater tunnel connecting to interrogation chambers, proving the whispers were literal. Confessions extracted here echoed eerily through the palace's pipes. The most enduring legends often mask darker truths. York's Black Dog Tunnel, where a spectral hound supposedly guards Templar gold, likely originated from actual guard dogs kept by medieval moneylenders in the underground wool trade. In Germany's Wewelsburg Castle, whispers of SS occult rituals in the Crypt of the Dead gained traction when post-war excavations uncovered a sunken chamber with 12 pedestals, a haunting parallel to Nazi fascination with Arthurian legends. These stories aren't just campfire fodder, they're cultural memories encoding real events too painful or subversive to document openly. What gives these tales their staying power? Partly, it's the spaces themselves. The catacombs of Paris, with their skull-lined corridors, practically beg for ghost stories, but there's also a deeper psychology at work. Medieval tunnels were liminal spaces, thresholds between life and death, sacred and profane. When Londoners reported screams from plague pits during the Blitz, they weren't just hearing things. Archaeologists later confirmed the bombing vibrations had shifted bones in ways that created eerie, flute-like sounds, a macabre example of how these spaces literally amplify our fears. Modern technology hasn't dispelled the legends, it's given them new life. Thermal imaging in Edinburgh's vaults occasionally shows cold spots, exactly where underground streams pass beneath the floors, perfect fuel for tales of spectral chills. In Rome, laser scans of the Domus Aurea's buried halls revealed graffiti from Renaissance artists who broke in, marveling at the grotesque frescoes and accidentally coining an art term. Their notes describe shadowy figures flitting through tunnels, likely just fellow explorers, but the seed was planted. Even TikTok's ghost hunting trend owes its viral appeal to medieval infrastructure. The app's most viewed haunted location is actually Manchester's Victorian-era sewers, built atop much older plague tunnels. These stories do more than entertain, they preserve history in ways official records can't. The Polish legend of the Golden Train, hidden in Nazi tunnels, wasn't just wartime rumor. It led explorers to actual abandoned rail networks under the Owl Mountains. Similarly, Sicily's Devil's Hole cavern, long dismissed as superstition, turned out to be a medieval Arab cistern with an acoustic quirk. Wind howling through its vents sounds uncannily like human screams. The line between myth and memory blurs fastest underground, where darkness turns every echo into a whisper from the past. As we peel back these layers of storytelling, another question emerges. Who kept these intricate tunnels from collapsing in the first place? The answer lies not in ghostly guardians, but in the sweat and ingenuity of real workers, teams of forgotten laborers who maintained these subterranean worlds against all odds. Their story, buried even deeper than the legends, reveals the true backbone of medieval urban survival. Keeping medieval cities functioning underground was a brutal, relentless job, one that fell to armies of workers most people never saw. Imagine descending into a sewage tunnel with nothing but a flickering tallow candle, the air so thick with methane that a single spark could ignite an explosion. This was daily life for the cloacarum custards of Rome, teams of enslaved workers who maintained the Cloaca Maxima. Their tools were primitive iron hooks to drag debris, wooden sledges to haul sediment, but their knowledge was precise. They memorized the sound of water flowing against walls, able to detect subtle changes that signaled a collapse risk. Records from London's Guildhall mention a worker named Hugh the Dyker, who could pinpoint blockages just by listening to echoes in the pipes, a skill passed down through generations. The real shock is how organized this labor became. In Nuremberg, the Brunnenmeister Wellmasters formed Europe's first documented waterworks guild in 1370. These weren't just laborers, they were specialists who apprenticed for years to learn how to reline cisterns with waterproof mortar or calibrate the slope of drainage channels to the precise angle needed for self-cleaning flow. Their contracts included hazard pay for repairing tunnels beneath the Pegnitz River, where a breach meant drowning in icy darkness. Meanwhile, in Constantinople, teams of prisoners, often captured crusaders, were given a grim choice: maintain the Valens aqueduct's underground sections or face execution. The aqueduct's survival relied on their desperate labor, with guards noting how some men intentionally crippled themselves to escape the suffocating maintenance shafts. Disaster response revealed these workers' true value. When an earthquake collapsed part of Siena's Bettini aqueduct in 1348, the city conscripted every able-bodied male to repair it, working in shifts so the tunnels never emptied. The diggers left behind a haunting record finger grooves worn into tunnel walls where they braced themselves, and in one chamber, charcoal sketches of saints scratched onto stone as prayers for protection. Venice took maintenance even more seriously. After the Great Canal blockade of 1410, when decades of neglected sewage tunnels backed up into palaces, the city established the Magistrato alle Acque, a water authority with power to confiscate property obstructing underground repairs. Their inspectors carried silver-tipped rods to test mortar quality, and contractors who cheated on materials faced public flogging. The tools and techniques these workers developed were marvels of ingenuity. Excavations in Ghent uncovered a medieval snake camera, a flexible lead tube with polished horn lenses, used to inspect pipe joints too narrow for human entry. In Toledo, Spain, Moorish engineers left behind copper listening rods that transmitted sound vibrations, allowing workers to detect cave-ins before they happened. But the most vital tool was sheer manpower. When Paris's Grand Egoat Great Sewer clogged in 1395, chronicles describe teams of prisoners chained together at the waist, scraping sludge into baskets passed hand over hand up vertical shafts. The death toll was so high that King Charles VI temporarily banned the practice until the next flood proved the city couldn't function without it. What's often forgotten is how maintenance shaped urban society. In Bruges, the Dijkgraaf Dijkcount held veto power over new construction if it interfered with underground water channels. London's gong farmers became unlikely elites, their monopoly on waste removal so lucrative that Queen Elizabeth I granted them a royal charter. These workers weren't just maintaining infrastructure, they were the invisible hands balancing public health against economic growth, often making judgment calls we'd now delegate to engineers. A single decision to delay cleaning a tunnel during plague season could doom a neighborhood, while rushing repairs might collapse entire streets. The true testament to their skill lies in what survived. When archaeologists recently reopened a sealed medieval drain beneath Exeter Cathedral, they found its original wooden sluice gates still operational after 700 years, the cedar carefully rubbed with beeswax to prevent rot. Nearby, someone had carved a tiny face into the wall, winking at whoever next entered. It's a reminder that these weren't just laborers in the dark, they were craftsmen who took pride in work meant to outlast them. And while their names are mostly lost, their legacy flows beneath us every time a modern city avoids flooding or keeps drinking water clean, proof that the most vital urban innovations often happen where no one thinks to look. History often paints medieval engineering as a world of hooded monks and burly stonemasons, but beneath that surface lies a hidden truth. Women weren't just incidental to these underground marvels, they were often their architects. Take the Beguines of Bruges, a lay sisterhood who defied convention by designing and maintaining their own subterranean water network. These women weren't nuns bound to a cloister but independent artisans who channeled runoff from their textile workshops into a labyrinth of brick-lined drains, preventing floods in their communal courtyards. Their system was so effective that city engineers later incorporated it into Bruges' municipal sewers, but the Beguines were far from alone. In York, tax rolls from 1390 list a Margaret the Springkeeper paid to oversee maintenance of the city's underground conduits, while Venetian archives mention a certain Isabetta the Well Watcher, whose job was to test water quality in cisterns using an early form of bacterial analysis, observing how quickly silver coins tarnished when submerged. Some contributions were less official but no less vital. In the peat-rich Low Countries, generations of women passed down techniques for stabilizing tunnel walls with woven willow mats, a method still visible in the preserved foundations of Amsterdam's medieval canals. Meanwhile, the legendary tunnel grannies of Prague's Jewish quarter, elderly women paid in bread and coal, used their knowledge of wartime escape routes to guide engineers repairing collapsed passages after floods. Their handwritten maps, though dismissed as folk tales for centuries, were recently proven accurate by 3D laser scans. The most striking examples come from unexpected places. Beneath the Spanish city of Toledo, Moorish hydrology manuals reference a female engineer named Lubna of Cordoba, who redesigned Roman qanats to include filtration chambers lined with crushed pomegranate rinds, a natural antibacterial agent. And in the alpine town of Hallstatt, women salt miners left behind leather gloves with reinforced fingertips, suggesting they worked alongside men in the perilous depths where collapses were frequent. These weren't exceptions, they were part of a quiet tradition. When the Black Death decimated male workforces, guild records from Cologne show women stepping into roles as tunnel surveyors and mortar specialists, their wages suddenly matching men's, until demographics normalized and their contributions were again erased from ledgers. What makes these stories revolutionary isn't just the gender equality they hint at, it's the distinctly female innovations that male engineers often overlooked. The Beguines' drains, for instance, included gentle slopes to prevent erosion during heavy rains, a feature absent in men's steeper designs. In Lincoln, a widow named Agnes the Digger pioneered the use of sheep's wool as pipe insulation after noticing how it kept her cellar dry. Even childbirth played a role. Midwives in subterranean Norwich crypts developed ventilation shafts based on birthing chamber airflow, later adapted for mine safety. The real tragedy is how easily these breakthroughs faded. By the Renaissance, women's names vanished from engineering records as guilds tightened membership rules. But the proof remains in the wear patterns of steps shaped by smaller feet, in the ergonomic handles of tools sized for slighter grips, and in the quiet persistence of systems that still function today because someone thought differently about how water flows or walls bear weight. These women didn't just work in the shadows, they reshaped them, and as we'll see next, their adaptations to another invisible force, climate, would determine whether cities thrived or collapsed under nature's whims. Medieval cities didn't just endure extreme weather, they engineered their underground spaces to actively combat it, turning tunnels and chambers into climate control systems centuries before the invention of modern HVAC. In the frostbitten north, where winter could freeze ink in its well, builders packed their tunnel walls with layers of straw and animal hair mixed with clay, an insulation method so effective that archaeologists in Oslo recently uncovered a 14th century passage where the interior stayed a stable 42 degrees Fahrenheit while surface temperatures plunged below zero. The secret lay in the details. Straw fibers trapped tiny air pockets to block heat transfer, while clay's natural moisture resistance prevented rot. Some Scandinavian tunnels even featured double walls with a gap filled with crushed seashells, a primitive but brilliant thermal break that kept frost from creeping inward. Meanwhile, in the scorching Mediterranean, engineers exploited the Earth's natural cooling properties. The underground storerooms of Sicily's Palazzo Conte Federico maintain a constant 60 degrees even during summer heat waves, thanks to clever airflow designs. Narrow entrance shafts created a cold trap, letting dense, cool air sink while hot air escaped through upper vents. Moorish builders in Granada took this further, lining tunnels with porous clay pots filled with water. As evaporation occurred, the surrounding air could drop another 15 degrees, creating natural refrigerators for food storage. The most sophisticated systems appeared in Persian caravanserais, where underground wind towers called badgers funneled breezes over qanat water channels before distributing the cooled air through tunnels to sleeping chambers above. Adaptation wasn't just about comfort, it was survival. During the Little Ice Age's brutal winters, German miners retreated into tunnels warmed by geothermal vents, allowing silver production to continue when surface workshops froze solid. In drought-stricken Andalusia, farmers stored seed grain in limestone cisterns where stable humidity prevented desiccation, ensuring crops could be replanted when rains returned. Even the Black Death spurred innovation. Venetian plague doctors realized underground quarantine wards stayed cooler, slowing the decomposition of corpses and possibly reducing infection rates. The true genius lay in localized solutions. Icelandic turf houses used underground thermal mass to retain warmth from geysers, while the cliffside city of Matera in Italy carved dwellings where summer heat rose through chimney-like shafts, drawing cool air from lower chambers. In China's lowest plateau, entire villages lived in Yeadong cave homes where the Earth's insulation kept interiors temperate year-round, a tradition dating back to the 2nd century that still shelters millions today. These weren't just random experiments, they were systematic applications of observed phenomena. Medieval builders noticed how caves maintained constant temperatures and replicated those conditions artificially. When English monks recorded that wool bales stored in chalk tunnels resisted mold, they began lining wine cellars with the same material. Every solution emerged from intimate knowledge of local materials and microclimates. a kind of vernacular science passed down through generations of stonemasons and well diggers. What makes these adaptations remarkable isn't their complexity, but their scalability. From a single farmer digging a root cellar to the vast underground galleries of Cappadocia that housed thousands, the principles remain the same: work with the Earth's natural rhythms rather than against them. Modern passive house designers are now rediscovering these medieval techniques, proving that sometimes the most advanced solutions are those that have been buried in plain sight for centuries. As we uncover more of these climate-smart structures like the recently discovered ice tunnels beneath Russian monasteries where winter harvests were preserved year-round, we're forced to reconsider medieval engineering as anything but primitive. These builders created microclimates with nothing but observation, local materials, and sheer ingenuity, leaving behind blueprints for sustainable living that we're only now beginning to fully appreciate. This mastery of underground environments didn't just preserve food and regulate temperatures, it created spaces where knowledge itself could survive the turbulence of the surface world. And it's in these climate-controlled sanctuaries that we'll find our next chapter, the secret schools and libraries where medieval learning went underground. When the surface world turned dangerous for thinkers, medieval scholars simply moved their classrooms underground, beneath the streets of Bologna, where the oldest university in Europe still stands, lie forgotten lecture halls carved into the soft sandstone. These weren't just makeshift bunkers, they were carefully engineered spaces with tiered seating for students and alcoves for oil lamps that burned without smoke to avoid detection. The real genius lay in their acoustics. Parabolic arches carved into the ceilings allowed professors to whisper complex legal theories and medical concepts, their voices carrying clearly to every corner despite the need for secrecy. Similar hidden classrooms existed beneath Oxford's Bodleian Library, where Jewish scholars taught forbidden Arabic texts during periods of religious persecution. Libraries took even greater precautions. Beneath a nondescript monastery in southern France, archivists built a climate-controlled manuscript vault accessible only through a fake well shaft. The chamber's constant humidity, maintained by an underground spring, preserved delicate vellum scrolls containing Greek philosophy that contradicted church doctrine. In Prague, rabbis safeguarded the famous Altnuschel library by constructing a labyrinth of false walls beneath the synagogue, their locations known only to 3 trusted custodians at any given time. Some of these hidden collections were vast. The Cairo Geniza, concealed beneath a synagogue storage room, held nearly 300,000 documents before its rediscovery in the 1800s. The methods of concealment were as ingenious as the knowledge they protected. Moorish Spain's underground libraries of resistance used hollowed-out olive oil jars to store rolled manuscripts, the oil's residue protecting the parchment from insects. In Ireland, monks on the run from Viking raiders sewed precious illuminated gospels into their robes, later burying them in waterproof leather satchels beneath high crosses, a practice that saved treasures like the Book of Kells. Even the physical arrangement of these secret archives followed careful logic. Troublesome texts were often placed near sewage channels or plague pits, areas authorities avoided. What's remarkable is how these underground networks connected across continents. Jewish scholars in York corresponded with counterparts in Toledo through coded messages hidden in merchant wagons, their letters referencing tunnel landmarks only initiates would recognize. Byzantine physicians fleeing Constantinople's fall in 1453 carried medical knowledge along subterranean trade routes that stretched all the way to Salerno's underground medical school. The famous chain libraries of medieval Europe, where books were literally chained to desks, had their clandestine counterparts in tunnels where knowledge circulated freely among trusted hands. The legacy of these hidden institutions lives on in surprising ways. Modern digital encryption methods echo the visual codes medieval scribes used to mark authentic copies of Aristotle's works. The Vatican's current underground archives, with their climate-controlled stacks and restricted access, owe their design principles to these earlier secret collections. And when archivists recently scanned the walls of Bologna's historic anatomy theatre, they discovered layers of hidden notes scratched into the plaster, centuries-old student graffiti debating Gaelic medicine that had been concealed beneath later frescoes. These spaces did more than preserve books, they maintained the very possibility of questioning, debating, and reimagining the world when official channels turned hostile. The next time you walk past an ordinary-looking cellar door in an old university town, consider what might lie beneath, not just shelves of forgotten texts, but the stubborn human insistence that ideas can outlast any attempt to bury them. As we trace these secret networks of knowledge across Europe, another fascinating pattern emerges: how dramatically underground engineering solutions differed from region to region, shaped by local materials, threats, and traditions. The North's approach to tunneling through glacial till bore little resemblance to the South's techniques for carving through volcanic tuff, yet each produced marvels perfectly adapted to their environment. Digging beneath the streets of medieval Europe reveals a striking divide not between kingdoms or languages, but between the very bones of northern and southern cities. In the frosty reaches of Scandinavia and the British Isles, builders turned to the materials beneath their feet: rugged stone and mighty timbers. The tunnels beneath York and Bergen weren't just dug, they were braced with whole oak trunks, their bark still clinging in some cases, forming rib-like supports that flexed slightly during freezes to prevent cracking. These wooden skeletons gave northern tunnels a surprising resilience against the heaving of frozen ground, while limestone blocks from local quarries provided weight and stability against the pressure of muddy soils. Walk through these passages today, and you might still catch the faint scent of pine tar, used to waterproof joints against relentless groundwater. Meanwhile, under the Mediterranean sun, a different architectural language emerged. Cities like Seville and Palermo built their hidden worlds from brick and mortar materials that breathed. The Romans had perfected the recipe for hydraulic cement, and medieval southern engineers inherited this knowledge, mixing volcanic ash or crushed terracotta into their mortar to create self-healing properties when exposed to moisture. Moorish builders in Cordoba took it further, adding egg whites to their mortar for increased elasticity, allowing their underground canals to withstand earthquakes that would shatter northern stone tunnels. The very color of these southern passages tells a story. Siena's tunnels glow russet from local clay, while Toledo's bear the distinctive golden hue of Tagus River sand. Climate dictated more than just materials, it shaped entire design philosophies. Northern tunnel entrances often featured steep, sheltered staircases to prevent snowdrift blockages, like those still visible in Oslo's medieval undercroft. In contrast, southern access shafts were designed for airflow, their spiraling ramps maximizing passive ventilation, a necessity in regions where stagnant air could turn tunnels into furnaces. Even the threats differed. While northern engineers worried about frost upheaval, their southern counterparts engineered against flash floods. The cisterns of Constantinople included ingenious sedimentation chambers that let silt settle before water entered storage, a feature unnecessary in the North's clearer glacial meltwaters. The most fascinating differences emerge in how these regions adapted foreign ideas. When Gothic techniques spread south, Catalan builders reinterpreted ribbed vaulting underground using lightweight brick instead of stone, creating area subterranean spaces. Conversely, German miners visiting Italian cities brought back mortar recipes but adapted them with local lard for freeze resistance, creating a hybrid material that powered the silver mining boom in the Harz Mountains. This wasn't just practicality, it was a dialogue across continents, written in clay, stone, and timber. What unified these diverse approaches was their shared genius for turning constraints into advantages. The North's limited stone supply led to clever reuse Edin, Burr's underground closes often repurposed rubble from demolished surface buildings. Southern cities, lacking abundant timber, developed brick barrel vaults that required no wooden scaffolding during construction. Each solution bore the fingerprints of its environment, yet all served the same ultimate purpose: survival beneath the streets. These regional quirks sometimes produced unexpected benefits. Northern timber tunnels, for all their vulnerability to rot, had one brilliant side effect: their walls absorbed moisture during humid summers, then released it gradually in winter, acting as natural humidity regulators. Southern brick tunnels, meanwhile, accumulated beneficial saltpeter crystals on their walls, a byproduct of mortar chemistry that became a prized ingredient for gunpowder during wartime. Even the sounds differed. Northern stone tunnels created eerie echoes perfect for amplifying chants in underground chapels, while southern brick passages muted footsteps, a feature spies and diplomats would later exploit. As trade routes expanded, these regional styles began to cross-pollinate. The Hanseatic League brought Flemish brickmakers to Baltic ports, where they taught locals to build furnace-like kilns that could fire bricks in cold climates. Venetian engineers working in London after the Great Fire introduced southern mortar techniques to prevent sewage tunnel collapses. The result was a quiet revolution, underground spaces that blended the best of both worlds, like Gdansk's hybrid timber brick water tunnels that withstood both freezing winters and summer floods. This diversity wasn't just about materials, it reflected deeper cultural attitudes toward the underground. Northern mythologies often portrayed subterranean spaces as realms of spirits and hidden knowledge, leading to more ritualistic designs like the labyrinthine tunnels beneath Scandinavian churches. Southern traditions, influenced by Roman practicality and Islamic hydrology, treated underground engineering as a science first. The contrast can still be seen today. Compare the rune-carved pillars of Bergen's ancient tunnels to the precisely calibrated flow channels in Granada's cisterns, and you're seeing two distinct worldviews etched in stone and clay. What emerges from these regional differences is a powerful lesson about medieval innovation. There was never just one right way to build beneath a city. Whether braced with oak or mortared with crushed terracotta, these tunnels all achieved the same remarkable feat. They turned the earth itself into a partner rather than an obstacle. And as we'll soon see, some of these underground spaces would become stages for a very different kind of partnership, the delicate dance of diplomacy between rulers who dared not meet in the light of day. Beneath the pomp and ceremony of medieval courts lay a shadow network of tunnels where the real business of power unfolded, far from prying eyes and wagging tongues. Picture the secret chamber under Westminster Palace, its walls lined with thick wool tapestries to muffle voices, where English kings negotiated with rebellious barons during the Magna Carta crisis. These weren't just rooms, they were carefully engineered sanctuaries for high-stakes diplomacy. At the heart of Prague Castle, a narrow staircase hidden behind a false fireplace descends to the Green Room, where Holy Roman Emperor Charles Roman IV held clandestine talks with papal envoys. The walls, painted in verdigris green to soothe tempers during heated debates, still bear scratches from anxious fingernails, and the soot of candles burned through countless all-night negotiations. The logistics of these spaces reveal a dark art of political survival. In Burgundy's Château de Germals, a tunnel wide enough for two men to walk abreast connected the Duke's bedroom directly to a nondescript stable outside the walls. a getaway route during coups, but also a discreet passage for mistresses and spies. More ingenious still were the whispering galleries beneath Venice's Doge's palace, where strategically placed vents allowed officials to eavesdrop on foreign ambassadors being escorted through official chambers above. The Republic's infamous Council of Ten even maintained a secret map room beneath the canals, its walls etched with the locations of safe houses and bolt holes across the city. Some tunnels served as early versions of diplomatic immunity. Beneath the Rhine River, a submerged passage linked the rival cities of Mainz and Wiesbaden, allowing messengers to cross during sieges without fear of arrows. In Constantinople, the underground Mies Avenue, originally a Roman sewer, became a neutral zone where Byzantine and Ottoman envoys exchanged hostages under truce flags. These spaces weren't just about secrecy, they were theaters of psychological warfare. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth's Crimson Tunnel, beneath Wall Castle, was deliberately lined with rust-red bricks to unsettle visiting envoys, while the Habsburgs installed uneven flooring in their Vienna meeting chambers to make adversaries literally lose their footing during negotiations. The true brilliance of these systems lay in their deniability. When French King Louis Roman XI needed to disavow an unpopular treaty, his ministers would accidentally leak details of the subterranean chamber where it was signed, allowing public outrage to force renegotiation. Papal legates meeting in Avignon's underground halls left no written records, communicating instead through coded gifts. A silver dagger meant war, a crystal goblet signaled alliance. Even the architecture played tricks. The elliptical vaults beneath Castel del Monte in Italy amplified whispers between allies while distorting words for anyone outside the chosen circle. Yet these marvels of subterranean statecraft carried deadly risks. In 1488, a collapsing tunnel trapped and suffocated the entire delegation of Hungarian nobles sent to negotiate with Matthias Corvinus. The infamous Moscow Fire of 1571 began when a clandestine meeting beneath the Kremlin ignited hidden gunpowder stores. And when Milan's Visconti family grew paranoid, they booby-trapped their diplomatic tunnels with false floors that dropped unwanted guests into oubliettes, a grim reminder that in medieval politics, the line between guest and prisoner often lay beneath a thin layer of earth. The legacy of these hidden corridors endures in modern diplomacy. The White House Situation Room's soundproofing owes its design to medieval whispering galleries, while Switzerland's nuclear bunkers for sensitive talks echo the Venetian model. Even today's bacchanal negotiations follow patterns set in these underground chambers where the fate of nations once hinged on conversations too dangerous to hold in the light. Progress didn't just build over medieval tunnels, it buried them. As cities raced toward modernity, these underground marvels faced three silent killers: neglect, disaster, and deliberate erasure. Take London's Fleet River, once the backbone of a sprawling medieval sewer network. By the 1800s, it had become a filthy open ditch, eventually entombed in brick to make way for streets and railways. But the Fleet was lucky, at least it got repurposed. Countless other tunnels met crueler fates. When Paris underwent Haussmann's radical redesign in the 1860s, workers simply filled ancient quarries with rubble, sealing off entire neighborhoods of history beneath fresh boulevards. Earthquakes finished what humans started. Lisbon's intricate medieval drainage system vanished overnight in 1755 when a massive quake collapsed its tunnels like sandcastles. Yet abandonment wasn't always accidental. Some cities actively scrubbed their subterranean pasts from memory. After the Protestant Reformation, Catholic escape tunnels across England were deliberately collapsed or filled with quicklime to erase evidence of popish plots. In Nuremberg, Nazi engineers dynamited medieval Jewish ritual baths beneath the city to rewrite history, leaving only a few telltale arches visible to those who knew where to look. Even natural disasters became tools of forgetting when a 14th century tsunami flooded parts of Genoa. Officials used the silt to permanently seal the underground grain stores that had once saved the city from sieges. What's fascinating is how many systems survived precisely because they were forgotten. The tunnels beneath Exeter, England, lay undisturbed for centuries after being walled up during the English Civil War, preserving 17th century graffiti perfectly intact. In Edinburgh, entire streets were built over Plague-era vaults, their existence fading into urban legend until a collapsed sidewalk revealed them in 1988. These accidental time capsules offer archaeologists priceless snapshots of medieval life, from half-eaten meals left in haste to tools dropped during tunnel digging. The most surprising survivals often come from repurposing. Constantinople's vast basilica cistern, abandoned for years, found new life as a silk workshop before becoming the breathtaking tourist attraction it is today. Similarly, the underground canals of Bruges, once vital for wool transport, now power a microbrewery's cooling system. Even failed infrastructure found second acts. The abandoned silver mine tunnels beneath Kutna became a bone chapel, their walls artistically lined with the skeletons of plague victims. Modern engineers are now racing to relearn what medieval builders knew instinctively. When New York's subway tunnels flooded during Hurricane Sandy, planners studied Venice's medieval floodgates for solutions. Tokyo's earthquake-proof underground shopping centers take cues from Cappadocia's flexible tunnel designs. And perhaps most poetically, climate change researchers are poring over records of medieval Fogu tunnels in Cornwall. These mysterious underground passages, once thought to be food stores, actually created stable microclimates that could teach us how to weather coming storms. The real lesson of these lost and found networks: cities have layers like ancient parchment scraped clean and rewritten. The medieval underground wasn't erased, it's sleeping beneath our feet, waiting for the right moment to whisper its secrets again. And as we face new challenges, rising seas, overcrowding, heat waves, we're realizing that the past might hold more answers than we ever imagined. The future of urban survival could depend on listening to those whispers before it's too late. What if the solutions to our most pressing modern challenges, rising temperatures, flooding cities, unsustainable energy use, were buried right beneath our feet? Medieval engineers didn't have climate models or supercomputers, but their underground systems are now inspiring a revolution in green architecture. Take the ancient qanats of Persia, those gravity-fed tunnels that transported water without a single drop lost to evaporation. Today, cities like Yazd in Iran are reviving them to combat drought, while in Spain, architects have adapted the design for cooling tunnels that reduce urban heat islands by channeling nighttime air through subterranean labyrinths. Even Barcelona's latest park features a qanat-inspired system that lowers temperatures by up to 15 degrees without electricity, just like its medieval ancestors. Flood prevention is seeing a similar revival. London's Thames Tideway Tunnel, a massive modern sewer, may seem cutting edge, but its core principle, using gravity-fed channels to manage water flow, comes straight from medieval Paris. Engineers studying the city's 12th century sewers discovered something astonishing. The original builders had calculated slopes to within a fraction of a degree, ensuring self-cleaning flow rates that modern software confirmed as optimal. Now, Rotterdam's water plazas mimic medieval cisterns, storing stormwater in underground basins that double as public spaces during dry spells, just like Istanbul's ancient basilica cistern once did. Even geothermal energy is getting a medieval makeover. the town of Show's Eggs, where hot springs once heated homes through stone pipes, now supplies 80% of its energy needs using the same underground network, except now, turbines convert the heat into electricity. In Iceland, engineers have scaled this concept globally, tapping volcanic heat through boreholes modeled after medieval steam vents, the most unexpected twist. Data centers are jumping on board. Microsoft's underwater server farms borrow from medieval cooling techniques, using ocean currents instead of aqueducts to dissipate heat naturally. But perhaps the most profound lesson lies in material science. Researchers analyzing mortar from Rome's Cloaca Maxima found it contained volcanic ash, making it self-healing when wet, a property now replicated in modern, living concrete. Meanwhile, the straw and clay insulation used in Norwegian tunnel homes has inspired a new generation of carbon-negative building materials. At the University of Bath, architects are testing medieval lime plaster recipes that absorb CO2 as they cure, turning walls into carbon sinks. The brilliance of these ancient systems wasn't just their ingenuity, it was their adaptability. Medieval builders worked with nature, not against it, creating infrastructure that evolved over centuries rather than crumbling in decades. As rising seas threaten coastal cities, some are turning to Venice's medieval response, floating foundations. Amsterdam's newest neighborhoods sit atop hollow pontoons inspired by the Italian city's wooden pilings, while Tokyo's flood barriers incorporate adjustable gates modeled after Venice's lagoon locks. Even earthquake-proofing has roots in the past. Engineers studying Turkey's rock-carved city of Derinkuy, you noticed its honeycomb structure dispersed seismic forces, a technique now used in California's skyscrapers. What makes these medieval solutions so valuable today isn't nostalgia, it's their proven resilience. When Hurricane Sandy flooded New York, the areas least affected were those built on old marshland with natural drainage, much like medieval cities intentionally preserved wetlands as buffers. Modern planners are finally recognizing that sometimes the best way forward is to look backward, way backward. From Chicago's permeable pavements based on medieval cobblestone drainage to Singapore's Sponge City initiative modeled on Moorish water gardens, the past isn't just whispering, it's shouting blueprints for survival. The irony, our ancestors may have built the future we've been searching for all along. The secret infrastructure beneath medieval streets reveals more than just clever engineering. It shows us how civilizations adapt when pushed to their limits. These hidden networks weren't built out of ambition but necessity. When walls couldn't stretch wider, they dug deeper. When enemies surrounded them, they vanished underground. When water ran scarce, they channeled rivers through stone. What makes these systems truly remarkable isn't their complexity, but their enduring logic. The same principles that kept a 14th-century city from collapsing under siege could help modern neighborhoods survive floods or heat waves today. Consider the irony. Our ancestors, armed with nothing but hand tools and observation, created infrastructure that outlasted empires. The qanats of Persia still deliver water after 1,000 years, while some of our concrete highways crumble in decades. Venice's wooden pilings, petrified by mineral-rich waters, hold up palazzos that modern steel reinforcements struggle to match. Even something as mundane as medieval cobblestone streets, designed to flex under weight and let rainwater seep through, are now models for sustainable urban drainage. The past isn't just a curiosity, it's a catalog of proven solutions waiting to be rediscovered. This isn't about romanticizing the Middle Ages. Their world was brutal, short, and often desperate. But within those constraints, they engineered miracles. When the Black Death emptied cities, survivors used plague tunnels to distribute food without spreading infection, a lesson we echoed during pandemic lockdowns. When coal smoke choked London in the 1200s, they passed Europe's first air quality laws, forcing manufacturers to burn cleaner fuels. Every challenge they faced has a modern parallel, and their responses hold clues we've overlooked. The real legacy of these underground marvels isn't in the stones or tunnels themselves, but in the mindset they represent: flexibility over force, adaptation over domination. Medieval cities didn't conquer their environments, they danced with them. They turned floodplains into aqueducts, caves into granaries, and even sewage into fertilizer. In an age of climate crises and overcrowded cities, that philosophy might be their greatest gift to us. So the next time you walk down a city street, pause for a second. Beneath your feet could lie a medieval well that once saved thousands from thirst, or a tunnel that sheltered families during wars long forgotten. These silent ruins aren't just relics, they're reminders that human ingenuity thrives under pressure. And if our ancestors could engineer survival with picks and shovels, imagine what we might achieve by blending their wisdom with today's tools. If this journey through hidden history sparked your curiosity, hit that like button and subscribe. There are countless more forgotten wonders waiting to be uncovered. And drop a comment below: which medieval innovation blew your mind? Was it the geothermal heated baths, the counter-siege tunnels, or something we haven't even explored yet? Let's keep the conversation going, because history isn't just about looking back, it's about mining the past to build a better